Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone. So Eyal, thank you so much for joining me on The No Show. I'm really pleased to have you.
Not at all. Happy to be here.
Talk me through how you ended up sort of doing this in-depth research into the Bible and sort of trying to rethink how the Bible was sort of read throughout Europe.
I was very gradually dragged into that. So I did an MA dissertation on the Crusades, and more specifically about a poem that was written in the Dome of the Rock that was made into a monastery during the time of the Crusades. And it got me interested in the way the Bible was used by different people to create a national identity. And I fell into the rabbit hole of looking at the Bible in the Middle Ages and early modernity. And that was 17 years ago. And I only recently emerged from that. The Bible is a universe of its own. It's the most popular text that has been read and commented upon and engaged with in the Middle Ages and early modernity. And people knew it in different ways from across different parts of society.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about monks and nuns, but also kings and merchants. People from the lower classes, people from the upper classes would know something about the Bible, and trying to understand that and think about what it means took me a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've worked on understanding the Bible in the Middle Ages, and then I moved into looking at the materiality of Bibles, which was the last book, across both the medieval and early modern period.
You mentioned that the Bible is meant different things to different people. Talk me through sort of some of the examples.
So, for example, if you think about the Bible in monasteries, monks really lived the Bible very physically.
Mm.
So they would chant parts of the Bible day and night. So the idea for monks and their prayers was to emulate the singings of angels in heaven. So the idea is to do this kind of never-ending chant, which they try to do. They have the 7 canonical hours, so they did chant quite a lot, day and night, and they got to know the Bible very well because of that, especially the Psalms. But the way they knew it was very specific, because they knew it mainly through singing. Now, the vast majority of the population in the Middle Ages had a different type of access to the Bible, because they did not know Latin very much, which was still the language of the Bible, mostly, in Western Europe. And they did not have access to manuscripts very much, because these were very expensive. And also there was no Bible on parish churches, which is a modern invention. But still they knew quite a lot of the Bible, but in a different way, in a mediated way. So they've seen images of biblical scenes. They took part in processions. So they would walk with an entire congregation, recreating biblical scenes, and they would understand a little bit of the Latin. So they would know something about the Bible, but in a different way. And also there's the idea of the Bible as a book. Some people, mainly from the higher clergy, some of the nobility, would own a Bible. And other people would not, but maybe they would see something. They would see the glimmer of a jeweled binding of a gospel book in a cathedral, or something like that.
That's very interesting, especially because you sort of compare the way in which the Bible was sort of lived. Like some people experienced it through sort of drama, some through singing. Between the different periods and time that you studied, how significantly has the Bible in its connotations and interpretations changed?
It changed. It changed significantly, but the change is very, very gradual.
Okay.
So one of the most important moments of change, if you think about the overall history of the Bible, primarily as a book, is actually in the beginning of the 1200s, so between 1200 and 1230. That's a really important moment of change that we usually don't think about. And the Bible as we know it today really emerged then.
So what was that change? Why was that change so significant?
So we need to understand a little bit about the context of that change. So the beginning of the 13th century was a time where everything was happening. It was a time of prosperity, or relative prosperity in Europe, and huge advances in creativity on all sorts of levels. And that also had to do with the church and studies. So the first universities emerged as distinct institutions. Unique orders of monks also came to the fore. So what's called the Friars, the Dominicans and the Franciscans, which was a different type of a monastery. They were not living in monasteries, and their ideal was to embrace poverty and to walk and preach. But they were highly educated, and they required new books you could carry with you.
Okay.
So between that and the other factor we should take into account is the rise of the stationers. So when you think about medieval books, we still talk about manuscripts, hand-copied books at the time. You think about, monasteries and monk copying in a special room that's called a scriptorium, which is true, but this was not the case for most books at that period. By 1230, books were copied by lay stationers. So people who are not religious, still believing probably in God and Christianity, but not part of the church. And it was a job for them.
Yeah.
And they were able to produce a new kind of book. So between all these new developments, we see the rise of a new kind of book, a new kind of Bible. And then for the first time, we talk about mass-produced single-volume Bible. And it's hard to imagine how innovative it was. But think about it, that a hand-copied book of about 700,000 words was made so small it could fit into a large pocket.
Wow.
It's quite an amazing innovation. And these books also had a new feature that we still have today. Sorry?
Was this the work of the stationers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And these books also, and then for the first time you really have the Bible as one book. Before that, Bibles were typically a collection of numerous volumes.
All right. Okay.
But now you start talking about, as a standard, the Bible as a single book. And in order to navigate such a long book, you needed new devices as well. So suddenly we have this very specific layout and the rise of unified chapter divisions, which is something we didn't have beforehand. So the chapter divisions you use today when you read the Bible were made in the 1200s, yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I cut you off there, but that's really fascinating. The fact that innovation only is not too far in the past.
Yes. Before that, there were other divisions, but there was not a uniform system.
Okay.
So there were other ways of dividing, but having a uniform numerical division, so you can say chapter 12, and people from Spain to Bohemia and from Sweden to England would know exactly what you're talking about. That's then.
That's fascinating. So what did that mean, that the fact that people could have access to the entire collection of books within the Bible?
They start thinking about the Bible more as a whole, but also they're able to navigate it in a new way. And this is a good example of the kind of things I've been looking in the book over a long period of time. So chapter divisions are a great example, because chapter divisions were not made for the average person. Chapter divisions were made for trained professionals to enable them to look at biblical exegesis, so very sophisticated understandings of what the Bible is, the kind of things you would study in university. And for these people, chapter divisions made life much easier because they could look at biblical dictionaries or biblical concordances, which take one word and show where they appear throughout the Bible, or biblical interpretation, and then look back at their Bibles and find the location. But what happened? Over centuries, these divisions were being embraced by different type of people. So they were made for professionals, but 200 years later, we see them appear in Bibles in the vernacular, not in Latin, so in English or French or German or Czech. And in these Bibles, they helped lay people to navigate the text.
So there was no difference between the sort of the system. It's the same system. It's just translated into different languages.
Exactly. It's the same system, but when they do it, let's say in English Bibles, they have a rubric to explain how the system works because they know that their users are not familiar with that. They're no longer the trained professionals coming from the universities or the monastic orders. So they would explain even things like alphabetical subdivision that will be very simple for us, A, B, C, D kind of division, that they divided the chapter. They thought, well, it's worthwhile explaining to them because they might not get it.
Okay. And so is that how sort of was that the evolution of how people sort of could navigate the Bible, just the average person could navigate the Bible?
Yeah, it's a very long process. And it continued with print, which was begun in the middle of the 15th century. And of course, the first full book that was printed was a Bible, Gutenberg's Bible. And then you see it later on when print becomes more popular and books are becoming cheaper, then chapter divisions again take a more and more prominent role to assist people reading their Bibles.
That's really interesting. It's not something that even crossed my mind, the fact that this was such a major innovation in sort of the Bible. And ultimately, I guess, is that the more people that know how to navigate the Bible, the wider spread it becomes.
Yes, but you need to go back a few centuries to understand a few obstacles in the way.
Okay.
First of all, is literacy rates.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Because a lot of the population was not able to read, and you needed translations into the vernacular to enable more people to read, because in the Middle Ages, literacy is seen a lot of time as Latin literacy, but of course, more people would be able to read it in the vernacular, in languages they would be familiar with. And the other thing is price. So manuscripts are expensive books, even small ones, because you have two huge investments. One is the investment in writing support, which is, for most of the Middle Ages, parchment, the skins of animals. And later on, we see paper coming in, but still quite expensive. And this writing support is always a huge investment in terms of the price of books. Even in the print era, paper would sometimes be about more than half of the price of a book.
Oh, wow.
And the other thing that will take is an investment is the making of the book itself. So scribal hours in the Middle Ages, So a manuscript is a very expensive book. And only later on with print, but it took a good couple of decades for cheaper books to come to the fore, you find that books are becoming cheaper and cheaper, so people of the middling sorts can buy them. The poor would not be able to afford a book throughout the period we're talking about.
Okay.
But gradually you have more people who live in towns or the better off people in the countryside were able to afford books. And what you also see in the period, so these are the people also who would embrace literacy. And you see, as we progress out of the Middle Ages and into early modernity, a rise of a sort of a middling sort. So people who are not the nobility, but not penniless peasants, so to speak.
So I think one of the things that sort of presents itself as perhaps an obvious question for me, but in that period of time that you're talking about, was the Bible used in any way to sort of rally people to war?
It's a good question. So, first of all, it's a long period of time between 1200 and 1553. I would say the Bible was used for almost every purpose in that sense.
I mean, the reason I ask, because, the fact that so many people didn't have access to it, or like the poorest, who were the sort of largest faction of the population, didn't have access to it, may make it sort of a very powerful device to be used by rulers and kings.
That is true, and you do find it if you think about, you said rallying to war. So a lot of the accounts we have of the launch of the first, what was to be the first crusade in 1095. So the Pope at the time, Urban II, used the biblical book of Maccabees to exhort people to take the cross and go to the Holy Land. So you have that. But I want to talk about something else you said about people using the Bible, the kings using the Bible at a period. And I think one of the best examples for that, which is something I looked carefully at the book, is Henry VIII.
Okay.
And his ambivalence towards the Bible. Because a lot of the most important changes that took place were during Henry VIII's reign. So we think about Henry VIII, we think about the break from Rome, we think about his different wives, which was an important thing. So he was very, very obsessed with what he called his great matter, which is having a male heir. And he was the one who broke the Church of England from the Church of Rome, which had a very practical effect of passing about 25% of the lands in England to his control, which wasn't a bad thing for him, of course. But he was not a full reformer. Some of his advisors were. So if you think about Thomas Cromwell, he was very much on the side of reform. And the same Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. But Henry wasn't. And the two Thomases worked very hard to convince him to support an English Bible. And the result of that was what's called the Great Bible, which is a very large Bible. It's the first time a Bible was mandated for every parish in the realm, which is quite an innovation. But Henry was always ambivalent about lay people reading the book. So on the one hand, on the title page of the Great Bible, which Henry loved, you see an image of very majestic Henry distributing Bibles to everyone, and everybody shouts, "Long live the king," apart from 3 people who are stuck in prison and don't shout anything. And this is really Henry's ideal. He would give them the Bible, but it should serve a very specific goal. But what Henry was soon to discover is that if you give a Bible to the laity, if you put one in every parish church at a place that the laity can read, they would start thinking of for themselves, and they would not necessarily shout, "Long live the king." So Henry was immensely disappointed about how people reacted when they got his nice Bible. And he complained about it. And he said, no, this is not what you should do. You should not use it to form arguments. You should not use it to read while the priest is talking. And what happened is that the Great Bible was printed in 1539 in large numbers. So you have 7 editions of that Bible within 2 years. So this is 1539 to 1541. But very, very quickly afterwards, in 1543, Henry is making a U-turn. He's saying, no, the laity is no longer allowed to read the Bible.
Okay, so he does sort of retract that idea.
Yes, he doesn't take the Bibles back, but he passes a law that if you earn below a certain income,
you're not allowed.
If you're from the lower classes, or of course, if you're a woman, you're not allowed to read the Bible anymore.
That is hilarious. That's funny. I mean, it's even though it's not funny, but there's so much about it that sort of it rings true for things that we see in more modern times. You know, these religious sort of I don't know, yo-yos of like one day we're this, the next day we're not. One day we're, you know, extremely I don't know, like for example, in certain states in the world, one day they're extremely, conservative, the next day they're extremely liberal and trying to invite the world to them.
Yeah. Well, actually, I thought that Henry was a yo-yo like that originally, but what I realized looking at that Henry was persistent. It was the people who were the yo-yos, because he wanted something very specific.
Okay.
He wanted people to read the Bible and praise him. When it didn't happen, that was the consequence. So he was persistent. He knew from the beginning what should happen. The people didn't live up to his expectations.
That's actually hilarious to sort of look at it in that light. But then it also goes to show you how powerful religious narrative is. And, throughout the centuries, religious narrative has always been something that moves people. I mean, in the case of Henry VIII, it moved people against the will that he desired, but nonetheless, it moves people.
Yeah.
So how do we sort of then? I mean, in the case of the Bible, moving closer to modern times where we are now, how has the Bible sort of lost that influence, or has it lost?
Well, I think what you need to think about is it's a very complex picture, and part of it is secularization. So, in a way, we're closer to the situation in the Middle Ages than early modernity, because in the Middle Ages, I said before, people didn't have access to the Bible as a book. It was too expensive. They didn't know how to read Latin, right? Today, people don't read the Bible as well. Not because it's expensive. You can download it for free from the internet in any language, but people just don't do it because people are in a different place. And because of secularism, people think that it's irrelevant for them.
Was there a period of time where secularism was on the rise in history?
Secularism was on the rise, you mean?
Yeah, when there was a period, was there a period of time where people, there was a large, portion of the public that were secular?
Well, it's for the 20th century until now, if you think about the majority of the population is either secular or even religious, but most religious people would not read the Bible cover to cover. And I'm talking about Christians, of course.
What does that mean? I mean, having studied religion, having studied how people sort of interacted with the Bible, what do you think that means at large for society?
Today?
Yeah.
I think it's a shame. I think people lose much of their cultural heritage by not reading the Bible. I think if you think about it, you cannot really understand a lot of the works of people in the Middle Ages or early modernity if you don't understand the Bible. If you think about, Shakespeare or Milton or Chaucer, any of the great luminaries of the medieval, early modern period knew the Bible very well. And without us knowing that, I think we miss quite a lot in trying to understand their culture. So I'm not saying people should read the Bible today as a religious book and believe in it, but I think we've given up on this altogether.
That's very interesting. I mean, it's very interesting because, I was recently speaking to an academic who looks at sort of the role of religion when it comes to politics. And he looks at religiosity, and he says religion is very politically ambivalent. And in the case of Henry VIII, I'm sure there are plenty of other examples in the Bible. There is this sort of ambivalence towards the religion itself. So, but what you're saying is that it's more than just a religious text. It's a text through which we can connect with the past.
Yes, and I would say something else. It's such a big book that you can find it whatever you want. And even for religious people, there's some things they wouldn't want to read. So when you look at the way the Bible was read through parts of the Middle Ages, if you look at the first translations of the Bible the full Bible into English, the Wycliffe translations from about the year 1380s, 1390s, there are parts they recommend people not to read, like the Song of Songs, which is an erotic love poem that was very uncomfortable for many religious people. And then when you have the Bishop's Bible, for example, in 1568, it's a very large edition of the Bible, a huge book, but they mark out with inverted commas sections that they don't want the people to read. So someone went through the entire Bible and said, okay, this section, the lady shouldn't read that, this as well.
So this is an important question that I should sort of really interrogate a little bit, because you mentioned that you have these different periods in time and the Bible goes through these innovations and the form through which the Bible takes. And then, having manuscripts, then having, books and in one form. Those decision makers or those people with these innovations, are they the ones that shaped what the content was?
That's a really good question. And this is something I've worked on a bit, and there's more work to be done on that. So usually when you think about people who shaped the Bible, historians have looked at reformers, editors, translators. Okay, so people think about, these great intellectuals of the Middle Ages and then in modernity, people like Tyndale or Coverdale, or amazing intellectuals, Hebrew, totally, some of it, or Greek or Latin and German, and were able to translate the Bible into English. But one of the things I'm seeing in the books I'm looking at is we also have to take into account the people who made these books, the craftsmen, because sometimes they would change things and change them significantly, and their priorities were different. Some of them were people who were very religious, but they also needed to sell. A Bible is a very expensive book to make, and you don't want, and Gutenberg, the first person to print a Bible, went bankrupt.
All right.
It was a typical thing for printers at the time. It's a huge investment and it's very difficult to make it pay off. So they needed to make sure that their Bibles would sell. So sometimes they would change things in order to ensure that the Bibles would sell.
So change things.
And it could be small things, title pages, images, things like that. It could be big things. So one of the best examples is the translations of the Psalms in early modern period. So the translation people grew to know is the translation of the Great Bible I told you about, which wasn't a very good translation from the originals. So within 20-something years, you have 2 new translations of the Bible, much more accurate, the Psalms of the Bible, including translation of the Psalms, much more accurate, much better translations. But people didn't want that. They want the translation they knew for the Psalms. So when they reprint these books, it's called the Geneva Bible and the Bishop's Bible, they do away with the original, with the new translation, and bring back the old translation of the Psalms, which is what people knew and wanted.
That is interesting. That is so interesting. So it's essentially just a marketing practice.
It's also a marketing practice, yes. So, and sometimes they try to do both things at the same time. So John Day, who's a printer in the middle of the 16th century, he's believing in what he does. He's also a reformer, but he's also a very sensible and sophisticated printer who knows his market. So he says, okay, I'll print big Bibles because this is what you need for churches, but I also print small Bibles that people who can't afford a big Bible can also buy.
Okay.
And he justifies it by saying, actually, I'm taking care of the small people and want to give them the knowledge of the Bible, but of course he's doing what's called he's approaching a stratified market. He's trying to cover his bases and sell for everyone.
That is so interesting. Because I've never considered it from a selling perspective. because you attribute religion to all these altruistic values, but in reality, it was really a competition to sell.
Yeah. In 1541, Anthony Marler is petitioning the king to make sure that every parish church would have a Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So he said we should pass a law to make sure that each and every, although we had the law before, but we should have penalties, and it should be a very clear decree that every parish church should have a Bible. Why is he doing that? Because he's backing the Bible and he knows that he needs to sell.
This is, it is interesting. So then I guess perhaps in different sort of times under different rulers, the same pressing human need for money always applied.
Yeah.
This is so fascinating. I find this.
I think, but it gets worse with the printing press. And you have different innovation at the time that are similar to that, but it's an economy of scale. Because with manuscripts, your investment is more limited. So you can actually create only bespoke copies. So you'd go to a stationer and say, I want a Bible, and said, okay, how much you want, what type of Bible, like how big you want it, what type, how much money do you have, and then it will follow from that. But, and there's a question whether or not they actually sold books off the shelf or just made bespoke copies. But what you have with print is a different dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Because with print, you need to put all your investment before you sell a single copy.
Exactly.
You need to buy all the paper, pay the people to make it, create a type, print everything, and you're finished doing it only after you finish doing it, and only then you can get the money.
Mm-hmm. That's and obviously that then on a bigger scale like that, then I guess those businessmen or those printing press, tycoons needed more of a push to make Bibles widespread.
The Bible was also a selling product. It's a good gamble because people would buy it. So there's also that aspect.
That's very interesting. You mentioned in your book, so you've got a book on all this in-depth research, a material history of the Bible, and in your book you mentioned that one of the key things that needs to be done when looking at the Bible is to rethink the Reformation.
Yeah.
Tell me more about
that. Could you take 1 minute off? Sorry, just. So the Reformation was a good PR exercise.
Mm-hmm.
One of the impressive things is that people at the Reformation thought a lot about the value of what they were doing and trying to sell it very hard. So they celebrated what they're doing as a major change. Mm-hmm. And we have been taking that sometimes on board without thinking twice about it. And one of the good things at looking at the materiality of the Bibles is that you look at the books.
Okay.
And you get a different story.
Mm-hmm.
So the Reformation and people in the Reformation had a very specific idea of the Bible. What they're saying is that during the Middle Ages, during the time beforehand, people were restricted. They did not have access to the Bible. The Bible was in Latin and guarded heavily by the church.
Mm-hmm.
And only in the Reformation was the Bible fully translated into the vernacular, for example, like to English, and access was given to every ploughboy. And this is the phrase of William Tyndale, one of the key people translating the Bible, who actually died for his faith in 1536.
Mm-hmm.
It was burned at the stake. But when you look at the books themselves, you get a bit of a different picture. So, for example, what you see is that during the Middle Ages, there are actually quite a large number of Bibles in English already in the vernacular, and they're not made by, although these Bibles were originally translated by people from outside of the church who went against the church, what's called heterodoxy,
mm-hmm.
associated with John Wycliffe, who was burnt as a heretic, but only after his death. the majority of these Bibles, at least surviving Bibles, and they're surviving more than 250 copies, so it's quite a lot, comes from the church, come from people who are Orthodox, who didn't think about themselves as going against the church. And we know these books were used in nunneries, were used by monks, by priests, by friars, by kings. About 3 English kings had copies of the English Bible.
This is really big stuff there. This is a really sort of big finding.
Yeah, this is the way, but historians nowadays are beginning to think about the Reformation in different ways. And looking at materiality of Bibles is really helpful in appreciating that.
So traditionally, how did we view the Reformation?
As a breaking point. So really a before and after. And also what you also see is that the period itself could be described more as a mess than anything else.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a clear transition. And the chapter I write on the Great Bible, I called it The Great Bible as a Useless Book. Because what happened is that this Great Bible of Hussain Ayed, that is very expensive, and it's a very impressive book, it's very nicely printed, every parish church in the country is forced to buy one. Okay? And they tell them where to put them, but they don't tell them what to do with them. And the way church services go during Henry's reign is still in a very old-fashioned way. So the churches are forced to buy a Bible and to put it there, but it's the wrong book at the wrong place at the wrong time, and they don't know what to do with it.
So it's essentially just a useless book.
Yes. And then you have complaints. So reformers would complain about the fact that these books are being kept in a corner and being full of cobwebs because nobody is using them. They also complain about the priests taking the book, plucking it, as they say, from the area of the laity and taking it to their part. But of course, they cannot use it in the area of the laity if they want to use it in church services.
Yeah.
And the worst option of them all is, whilst the priest is talking, the people in the church actually would want to read the Bible that they actually paid half of its cost. But then that got Henry really upset, because that's the laity reading the Bible during services. And that's the reason he passes the law in 1543, preventing the laity from doing that.
Why was the Henry's Bible, why was that sort of seen as useless by the people? Why did they not want to engage with it?
No, it's not that they wanted to engage with it, but the way church services were carried at the time, it was without this kind of Bible.
Oh,
because it was still the service from the Middle Ages, mostly.
So they haven't sort of updated their software.
Yes, exactly.
That is hilarious.
And also think about church architecture. Medieval churches have a rood screen, so it's quite a big, not a screen, but could be a wall or a wooden partition between the area where the priest is and the area where the congregation is.
Okay.
Now, where would you put the Bible? They forced them to put the Bible in the congregation part, but the priest is on the other side of the screen. So if he wants to use it, what can he do?
This is, it sounds like a bit of a pantomime.
Yeah.
That's very... Yeah, where can people find you online? How can people reach out to you?
Google me. I have a website for the school. I also have, I would recommend, I've been doing for the last 2 months a new research project together with a scientist, a physicist called Paolo Ricciardi.
Okay.
And we've been using advanced scientific technology to look at presentation copies of the Great Bible. One made for Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell, and one made for Henry himself. And if you go on Twitter and do a 1539 Bible, we gave a Twitter page for the Bible.
Okay, yeah.
Find some of the discoveries there.
If you can send it to me, I'll link it into the episode so people can just get direct access to it.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, Eyal, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. I found it fascinating.
Excellent. No, I'm happy you liked it.
Excellent.
And good luck. I think I've listened to some of the blogs. It's really good.
Thank you for watching this video. Please help us keep the show alive by liking and sharing this video and by subscribing to the show and making sure the notification button is switched on. For those of you who can help a little bit more, there's a Patreon link down below where you can contribute whatever you can. Every little does help, and all the money will go directly back into the show. You can also keep up with our latest content on Instagram at The No Show Pod, as you can see on the screen. As you know, The No Show is an initiative designed to make academic research accessible to everyone. So do contribute to the conversation, leave some questions, have a discussion, and I'll make sure I get back to everyone.